Lila Matthews sat in the back of the grand ballroom, her eyes scanning the sea of faces. The soft hum of chatter filled the air, accompanied by the clinking of champagne flutes and the occasional burst of laughter. It was a perfect scene, an opulent wedding, the kind you'd see in the glossy pages of a society magazine. The Howard family had spared no expense for their daughter's big day. As Lila adjusted the $40,000 rental gown she was wearing, a wave of discomfort passed over her. It wasn't the dress. That was stunning, elegant, fitting her perfectly. It was the people around her. The polished, perfectly manicured world of the Howards. The guests, dressed in designer suits and gowns, looked down on Lila as if she were a mere guest at an event too grand for her. The Howards, after all, were a billion-dollar empire. Shipping magnates, real estate moguls, political donors, wealth that bled into every corner of the city, shaping it, manipulating it. Lila had seen this before in her decades as a forensic accountant, a polished exterior hiding something ugly. But she wasn't here to investigate. She was here for her son, Elliot. And despite her reservations about his fiancée, Sophia Howard, Lila had promised herself to keep the peace. After all, it was his wedding day. The ceremony had been flawless, much like everything else about this extravagant affair. And then came the reception. Lila was holding a glass of water, recounting an amusing story about her son's childhood to a woman sitting next to her when the disaster struck. As she gestured animatedly, a single drop of water fell from her glass and landed on the hem of Sophia's wedding dress. Lila froze. "Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to." But before she could react, Sophia's face shifted. In the blink of an eye, something cold and calculating passed over her features. She took a step back, a mock gasp escaping her lips. "Oh no," she said loudly, as if everyone had to hear. "How clumsy of me." And then, without hesitation, she raised her own glass, filled with red wine, and poured it straight onto Lila's gown. A gasp went through the crowd. A hush fell over the ballroom, everyone's eyes turning to the spectacle unfolding. Lila stood frozen as the wine splashed down, staining the expensive beads and delicate silk, the vibrant red liquid now soaking into the fabric. "Oh, Margaret!" Sophia cried, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I'm so sorry. I just got so startled." The crowd, too polite to speak up, murmured their sympathy. Lila stood still, feeling the weight of 30 years of working in forensic accounting, unraveling secrets that no one else had the stomach for. She had spent decades dealing with embezzlement, fraud, and money laundering, and in this moment she saw it clearly. Sophia wasn't just trying to ruin her dress. She was trying to ruin her. Lila smiled, the warmth in her voice completely at odds with the ice in her heart. "It's fine, darling," she said, loud enough for the guests to hear. "Accidents happen, though I do believe the rental company will be quite upset with this. $40,000 is a lot for an accident." The look on Sophia's face, the subtle flinch, was enough to confirm it. This was no accident. This was a deliberate humiliation, a power play. With controlled composure, Lila excused herself from the reception. As she stepped through the garden exit and walked toward her car, the anger began to build. Wine soaked into the delicate lace and beadwork of the designer gown, but it didn't matter. Lila was no stranger to stains. She had seen enough damage in her life to know that some stains, like secrets, couldn't be cleaned easily. She sat in the car, staring at the bill for the dress that had just arrived, a painful reminder of the cost of being humiliated. The stain on her gown was nothing compared to the stain on her dignity. But as Lila's fingers gripped the steering wheel, the anger morphed into something more, something sharper. Sophia had just made the biggest mistake of her privileged life. Lila Matthews wasn't just some old woman with money to lose. She was a woman who could unravel entire empires with a single spreadsheet. By the time she reached her home, Lila had already made her decision. The wine may have stained her dress, but the damage to Sophia Howard, to the entire Howard family, was about to be so much greater. The next few days were a blur. Lila couldn't shake the feeling that something much larger was at play, hidden beneath the surface of this lavish wedding. The incident with the wine had ignited a fire in her that she hadn't felt in years. As a forensic accountant, she knew too well how the wealthiest families operated, how they hid behind layers of power, connections, and money to avoid facing the consequences of their actions. And Sophia, with her cold smile and patronizing gestures, was just a symptom of that system. Lila spent the next few days doing what she did best, digging. The first step was simple. She called Linda, her longtime friend and former colleague, who worked in one of the biggest accounting firms in the city. Linda was still in touch with many of the industry's insiders, and Lila trusted her judgment. "I need you to run a background check on Sophia Howard and her family's business, Ashford Enterprises," Lila said as soon as Linda picked up the phone. "Everything. I want to know about their operations, their transactions, their subsidiaries. No stone unturned." Linda hesitated. "Lila, what's this about? This isn't just about a spilled drink, is it?" Lila's voice was steady, unwavering. "No, Linda, this is bigger, trust me." Over the next few days, Lila sat in her home office, carefully scanning the documents that Linda had provided. Corporate filings, SEC reports, tax returns, even off-the-books transfers, everything was under scrutiny. Ashford Enterprises seemed spotless at first glance, but Lila knew the game. She knew that wealth could buy a perfect facade. It was what was behind the mask that interested her, and it didn't take long for Lila to find the cracks. Ashford Enterprises, the multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, had layers of subsidiary companies that on paper made sense. They were diversified, logistics, shipping, real estate. But as Lila dove deeper into the financial records, she began to spot anomalies. Shipments that were billed at one price but sold at another. Subcontractors who were paid exorbitant sums yet didn't appear to exist. Payments to offshore accounts that didn't match any known contracts. It was classic money laundering, plain and simple. But Lila didn't just see that, they were making it personal. As the days passed, the details began to fall into place, one piece after another. The Ashford family wasn't just running a successful business empire, they were running a criminal empire, one that operated in plain sight. And Vanessa, with her polished charm and icy demeanor, was more than just a beneficiary. She was a participant, actively involved in moving the money and covering up the illicit operations. Lila sat back in her chair, staring at the screen, the evidence slowly building in front of her like a dam about to break. This wasn't just about family pride. This was about exposure, uncovering the rot behind the perfect facade of Ashford Enterprises. And the Howard family had made a fatal mistake when they underestimated her. She reached for her phone and dialed Linda again. "Linda, I need you to go deeper," Lila said, her voice low but determined. "I need a full audit of Ashford Maritime Solutions, their shipping subsidiary. Look at their transactions, their offshore accounts, their customs filings. We're dealing with more than just tax evasion here." There was a pause on the other end. "You're talking about opening a Pandora's box, Lila. What are you planning to do with this information?" Lila's gaze moved from the screen to the wine stain on her dress hanging in the closet. "I'm going to make them pay," she replied simply. "But I need to know everything first." The next week, Lila received the final piece of the puzzle. Linda had tracked down an alarming discrepancy in the shipping manifests for Ashford Maritime Solutions. A shipment of goods valued at $12 million was recorded in the company's financials, but the actual shipment, as confirmed by port records, was only worth $8 million. Where had the missing $4 million gone? The discovery wasn't just a red flag, it was a flashing beacon. The wine stain on her dress, the insult from Vanessa, it was all coming together. Vanessa's world was about to collapse, and Lila was the one who would bring it down. The phone rang, pulling Lila out of her thoughts. She glanced at the caller ID, David. She hesitated for a moment but answered. "Mom, we need to talk." His voice came through, tight with tension. Lila felt a sharp pang in her chest. She knew what this was about. It was always about Vanessa. "What's wrong, David?" Vanessa's upset. "About the dress," he said, his voice strained. "She wants to make things right. She wants to pay for the cleaning, or I don't know, make some kind of peace offering." Lila smiled bitterly, leaning back in her chair. "Tell Vanessa that it's already been paid, sweetheart. $57,000 for an accident. A very expensive accident, don't you think?" David's silence was palpable on the other end of the line. $57,000. What are you talking about, Mom? "I'm talking about your fiancé's little stunt at the wedding," Lila replied coolly. "The dress costs $57,000 and it's not something you can clean, it's destroyed. So yes, I've already paid for it, but that's not the worst part." "Mom, please don't make this into something bigger than it is," David said, his voice pleading. "I'm not making it into anything, David," Lila replied, her tone hardening. "But I am learning some very interesting things about your new family. Things that have nothing to do with a $50,000 dress. And you might want to start asking yourself just what kind of people you've married into." The call ended with a click, and Lila sat in silence, the gravity of her findings settling over her. Vanessa Howard had no idea what she'd just started. The following days dragged on as Lila continued to piece together the unraveling story of the Ashford family empire. She was no longer just dealing with an annoying, privileged daughter-in-law. Vanessa Ashford was now the key player in a much larger scheme, a criminal empire masquerading as legitimate business. Lila spent her evenings combing through financial documents. The discrepancy in the shipping records was just the beginning. As she dug deeper into Ashford Maritime Solutions, she discovered something even more damning. The company had been siphoning millions in undeclared income through offshore accounts, routing it through shell companies in places like the Cayman Islands and the British Virgin Islands. This wasn't just tax evasion. This was money laundering on a grand scale. But it wasn't just the family business that had her attention. Lila had uncovered a darker, more troubling connection. There were signs of human trafficking rings being operated through Ashford's logistics channels. Shipping manifests, which appeared legitimate on the surface, contained shipments with no proper declarations. Those shipments, Lila quickly realized, weren't just cargo. They were people, disguised as merchandise, hidden among real goods, trafficked through unsuspecting ports under the Ashford name. With each passing day, the truth became clearer. Vanessa's family wasn't just wealthy. They were criminals, and Vanessa was deeply involved, even orchestrating some of it from behind the scenes. And Lila, in her pursuit of justice, was now facing a battle that could destroy everything Vanessa had ever known. An empire built on suffering and corruption. But there was more to this story. As Lila sifted through records of various charity organizations linked to Ashford Enterprises, a chilling connection surfaced. Vanessa had used these fake charities to launder money, hiding criminal profits under the guise of philanthropy. In a cruel twist of fate, Lila had unknowingly been right where Vanessa's criminal web had spun its threads. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lila was deep in her study of the records when her phone rang. The caller ID flashed David. Lila sighed, steeling herself. It was time to face the music. "Mom," David's voice cracked through the phone, urgency lacing his words. "We need to talk." Lila set the papers down, her thoughts swirling. "What's going on, David?" "It's Vanessa. She's freaking out," David said. "She wants to meet with you to talk about everything, about what happened with the dress and, well, everything else." Lila knew this was coming. She'd expected it, and part of her relished it. The walls were closing in on Vanessa, and now it was time to see how much of the truth she could handle. "Where is she now?" Lila asked, her voice calm but firm. "She's at her father's office," David replied. "Look, Mom, this is bad. She's upset about the whole thing, and I know, David," Lila interrupted, her tone cold. "I know exactly what's happening, and I know exactly who I'm dealing with now." There was a long silence on the other end before David finally spoke. "Mom, you've been looking into things, haven't you?" Lila's lips tightened. "David, this isn't just about a $50,000 dress anymore. This is about something much bigger, and you need to understand no one humiliates me like that and gets away with it." "I didn't know about any of this," David said quickly, his voice defensive. "I didn't know how bad it was. You've got to believe me." Lila leaned back in her chair, her fingers trailing across the files spread out before her. "I do believe you, sweetheart, but you need to start asking yourself why Vanessa has been so eager to keep you in the dark. Why hasn't she told you about her family's businesses? Why hasn't she told you about the dirty money?" David was silent, and Lila could hear the gears in his head grinding to a halt. Finally, he sighed. "Where do we go from here?" he asked, the exhaustion evident in his voice. Lila's answer was simple, sharp, and unwavering. "We go to her father's office." Lila arrived at Ashford Enterprises the following day, a sleek, imposing building with tinted glass windows and marble floors that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Richard Ashford's empire was visible in every corner, every piece of polished furniture, every work of art hanging on the walls. It was a museum of power, and it made Lila feel like a small but dangerous cog in its machine. She'd made the decision to confront Richard Ashford directly. The game had changed, and now it was time for him to realize just how much power Lila had gained in the past few weeks. Richard was already in his office when Lila arrived, his back turned as he stood at the window overlooking the city skyline. As she entered, his cold, calculating smile crept across his face. "Margaret," he greeted her smoothly. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Lila crossed her arms, a faint smile playing on her lips. "I'm here to have a conversation about your family's business practices, and to let you know that I've connected the dots between your so-called philanthropic efforts and your money laundering schemes. All that fake charity work, it's nothing more than a cover for your dirty deals." Richard's expression didn't falter, but Lila saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. He was trying to calculate his next move, but Lila was always one step ahead. "I've uncovered everything, Richard," she continued. "The shell companies, the fake shipments, the people you've been trafficking, and I know that Vanessa has been playing a much bigger role in this than you've let on. You think I'm just some harmless older woman you can dismiss, don't you?" Richard's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his eyes narrowing in realization. He had underestimated her. Lila stepped forward, placing the evidence on his desk. "This isn't just about a dress anymore. This is about exposing everything you've worked so hard to hide. I'm going to make sure the whole world knows exactly who you are." For the first time, Richard Ashford's calm demeanor cracked. He leaned forward, his voice low and menacing. "You're playing a dangerous game, Margaret. You're not in a position to win this one." Lila didn't flinch. "Oh, I'm not playing a game, Richard. I'm just doing what I do best. And trust me, I always win." As she turned and walked out of his office, she felt the weight of the battle she had just entered. But there was no turning back now. She had everything she needed, and there was no way she was going to let Vanessa or her family get away with it. As she drove back to her house, Lila couldn't shake the feeling that everything was starting to fall into place. Richard Ashford had underestimated her, and now, The Ashford empire would crumble under the weight of its own secrets. Lila's life had been transformed in ways she never imagined. What started as a quiet mission of personal revenge had evolved into a battle that could bring down an entire criminal empire. With each piece of evidence she uncovered, she found herself standing closer to the edge of something monumental. The Ashfords' carefully curated image of old money respectability was a house of cards, and Lila had the wind at her back. As the days passed, the pressure on her grew. Vanessa's father, Richard Ashford, had underestimated the force he was dealing with. Lila wasn't just a woman scorned anymore. She was a formidable force of retribution, a forensic accountant with a razor-sharp mind and the tenacity of a pit bull. She knew exactly how to get under their skin. The night after her confrontation with Richard, Lila couldn't sleep. She couldn't stop thinking about the details she had uncovered, the money, the trafficking, the lies. What had started as an innocent search into the Ashfords' finances was now a full-blown crusade for justice. She had tapped into something dangerous, and she wasn't going to back down. The following morning, she met with Linda, her old friend and confidante, at the small cafe they frequented. Lila slid into the booth, her eyes scanning the street outside before locking onto the stack of financial papers on the table. "Lila, I gotta tell you," Linda said, her voice tinged with concern. "You're playing with fire here. Richard Ashford doesn't play games. If you're digging into his family like this, you've got to be ready for the consequences. You know how these things end." Lila placed a hand on the table, her fingers tapping rhythmically as she focused on the documents in front of her. "I've been in this game long enough, Linda. These people think they are untouchable. That's what makes them so dangerous. They forget that there are people like me who look for these kinds of things." Linda frowned but nodded. "All right, then. You've got your evidence. What now?" Lila smiled. "Now we start applying pressure." The following days were a blur of late nights and long hours of sifting through evidence, making connections and building her case. But as the days passed, Lila realized she needed to make her next move more impactful. She needed to rattle the Ashfords directly. Richard had already tried to neutralize her with a fake consulting job. Now, it was time to flip the script on them. Lila decided to use their own strategy against them. She started by connecting with Sarah, her old contact at the Treasury Department, who had been invaluable in helping her get access to classified documents. "I need your help again," Lila said over the phone, her voice steely with purpose. "I've got a lead, but it's going to require federal intervention. It's not just about tax evasion anymore. This is much bigger." Sarah's voice was cautious. "You're sure about this, Lila? You know once we start pulling on these threads, there's no going back." "I'm already too deep," Lila replied. "I need you to initiate an investigation into Ashford Industries. I've got everything I need. Detailed financial records, customs discrepancies, shell company transactions. If we act fast, we can catch them in the act before they can cover it all up." There was a long pause on the other end. Finally, Sarah spoke. "All right, I'll see what I can do, but you're asking for a federal probe. This will move fast and it's going to get ugly. Are you ready for that?" Lila's response was simple, her voice unwavering. "I've been ready for a long time." The Ashfords had no idea what was coming for them. Lila had planted the seed, and the federal investigation had begun to spiral outward like a web. Meanwhile, she kept digging into the Ashford financials, looking for that one final thread that would unravel the entire operation. It came sooner than expected. In a final act of boldness, Lila reached out to Vanessa, arranging a face-to-face meeting at a posh cafe, far from the prying eyes of the Ashford empire. She wanted Vanessa to feel like she still held control, like this conversation was an opportunity for reconciliation. But Lila wasn't interested in playing nice. Vanessa arrived looking flawless as always, her sharp suit and perfectly styled hair designed to impress. She approached the table with a slight smile, though Lila could see the tension in her eyes. She was playing a game, but Lila was already 3 steps ahead. "Margaret," Vanessa greeted with a cool tone, sitting across from Lila. "I'm glad you agreed to meet. I wanted to apologize again for the wedding. It was never my intention to." "Stop," Lila interjected, her voice firm. "I'm not here for your apology, Vanessa. I'm here because you've made a very big mistake, and now I'm going to make sure you understand just how big." Vanessa's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "What are you talking about?" Lila leaned in, her eyes narrowing. "You really think I didn't notice the lies? The way you manipulated your family's wealth to launder money? I know about the fake charities, Vanessa. I know about the shipping routes and the unreported cargo. I know about the people you've been hiding. Your family's empire is built on blood money, and you thought you could get away with it because you're rich and powerful. But you're wrong, and I'm not going to let you destroy any more lives." Vanessa's face shifted from calculated to frightened in the span of a second. You don't know what you're doing. You can't possibly understand how dangerous this is. My father." "I know exactly how dangerous this is," Lila cut in, "and I know how to bring it down. The FBI is already on it. It's only a matter of time before they catch up with you." Vanessa's eyes went wide. You've already." "Don't worry," Lila said, a cold smile on her face. "Your father will have a front row seat when everything comes crashing down. But don't think for a second that you'll escape this. You'll be just as culpable as he is." Vanessa's composure cracked, and for the first time, Lila saw the fear in her eyes. But there was no mercy in Lila's heart. This was no longer about a spilled drink or a personal vendetta. This was about stopping an empire of corruption, and Vanessa Ashford was at the heart of it. "I've already won, Vanessa," Lila said, standing up and walking away. "And now you'll have to face the consequences of your actions, all of them." As Lila left the cafe, she felt a sense of resolve settle in her chest. The Ashford empire was crumbling. It was only a matter of time before the truth came to light, and when it did, Lila would be there to make sure justice was served. The clock was ticking. The investigation was growing, the evidence mounting, and soon the Ashfords would have no way out. It was only a matter of time before their world came crashing down. The weeks after Lila's confrontation with Vanessa felt like a tense countdown. Every day, the walls around the Ashford empire inched closer to crumbling. Lila's mind raced as she reviewed the evidence she had collected. Everything was falling into place. The federal investigation had picked up speed, and the Ashfords were starting to feel the heat. But Lila wasn't done yet. She wasn't going to let them go down quietly. Her plan had 2 parts. 1, to make sure the evidence against them was undeniable, and 2, to ensure they couldn't use their influence to escape the law. Richard Ashford had always believed he could buy his way out of anything, and Lila was determined to prove that even the richest, most powerful families couldn't avoid justice forever. One late evening, as Lila sifted through a new batch of financial documents, she received a message from Sarah, her contact at the Treasury Department. The text was short and to the point. "They're starting to make moves. Prepare yourself." Lila's heart quickened. The Ashfords were mobilizing. She knew what that meant. They were trying to clean up the mess before the feds could fully act. Richard Ashford had hired a high-powered legal team, and it was only a matter of time before they attempted to bribe their way out of trouble or bury the evidence. But Lila had already anticipated this. She had the key piece of evidence they couldn't erase, a collection of recorded conversations, intercepted phone calls, and financial transfers that linked the Ashford family to organized crime, money laundering, and human trafficking. She set her phone down and called Linda, her trusted friend, who had been helping with the investigation behind the scenes. "It's time," Lila said, her voice steady with resolve. We need to move the evidence. I'm sending everything to Sarah in Treasury. No more delays." Linda's voice crackled with concern but also determination. "Got it. What's the next step?" "Next step," Lila replied. "We make sure they can't sweep this under the rug. We've got to send them a message they'll never forget." The following afternoon, Lila made her way to David's apartment. Since the day the investigation had gone public, their relationship had shifted. David was torn between his love for Vanessa and his newfound awareness of the criminal world she was a part of. He'd become a reluctant ally in this fight, unsure of how to reconcile his marriage with the truth he had come to accept. When Lila arrived, David greeted her with a tight smile, his face still drawn from the chaos of the past few weeks. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot about everything," he said as they sat down at his kitchen table. "I don't know what to believe anymore. Vanessa, she's not the woman I thought she was." Lila nodded, her eyes filled with empathy. "I know, sweetheart, I know." David ran a hand through his hair, the weight of everything pressing down on him. "I should have seen it. I should have questioned things earlier. I feel like I failed you and myself." "You didn't fail anyone, David," Lila said, her tone soft but firm. "You were just blinded by love, but now you need to decide who you want to be. This isn't about Vanessa anymore. This is about doing the right thing." David looked up at her, his gaze unwavering. "I'm with you. I want to bring her down. I don't care what it costs anymore, but I don't know how much more I can take." Lila gave him a reassuring smile. "I'll take care of it. You just focus on what you need to do next. We're going to finish this, David, and we're going to make sure they pay for everything they've done." That night, Lila stood in front of her apartment building, gazing out over the city lights. The tension in the air was palpable. Everything was about to come to a head. She had done everything she could to gather the truth, but the Ashfords weren't going down without a fight. Richard would do anything to protect his empire. But Lila had learned long ago that there was always a way to expose the truth. And when it came to money, there were always paper trails. At the same time, Sarah from Treasury had been working on securing the final pieces of evidence. Lila trusted her completely, knowing Sarah was as determined as she was to see this through. The feds had already begun interrogating key figures in the Ashford network. The pressure was mounting, and Lila could feel it in her bones. The next day, Richard Ashford made a critical mistake. At the Ashford family estate, he hosted a private meeting with his legal team, trying to strategize his next move. He never saw Lila's private investigator, Patricia, standing in the shadows, recording every word. Patricia had been instrumental in uncovering the connections between Ashford Industries and other criminal organizations. Now, she was about to deliver the final blow. As Richard Ashford talked about using his wealth and influence to fight back, his true colors finally began to show. Lila watched as the news broke on TV. Richard Ashford had been arrested, along with several members of his legal team, including Vanessa. The evidence they had gathered was damning: unreported income, fraudulent business practices, and a web of money laundering schemes spanning across continents. The Ashfords' reign had ended, but it wasn't over yet. Lila had one final move to make. Later that evening, Lila received a call from David. His voice was unsteady, a mix of relief and regret. "Mom, it's over. They're gone. I don't know how to feel." Lila exhaled deeply, her heart pounding. "I know, David, I know, but you made the right choice. You're free now. You'll be okay." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm just glad you're still here. I thought I lost you. I thought I lost everything." "You didn't lose me, David," Lila replied. "You've lost the illusion of safety, but that's the hardest part of growth. You'll be all right. We both will." The final chapter of the Ashford Empire had closed, but the real victory for Lila wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming her life, her dignity, and making sure that justice, not power, had the final say. As she closed her eyes that night, Lila felt a quiet sense of peace. She had dismantled an empire, brought down a criminal family, and helped her son find his way back to the truth. She had won, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been wronged by the Ashfords. And she knew this was only the beginning.